So today we're going to talk about God's work through Moses. Talking with Owen. Owen's become a good friend over the last several years. I get to pray with him on Thursdays and really enjoy that time. He tells me in the coming months you're going to be spending some time in the Old Testament, and so we're going to be looking at that today. So if you've grown up as a part of the church, you've gone to Sunday school, you've heard about Moses, I'd like to read what the writer of Hebrews in the New Testament, how he describes Moses. This is in, you can just listen, this won't be our main text for today, but Hebrews 11, verse 23 through 28. This is a chapter, Hebrews 11 is known by some as the Hall of Faith. Rather than a Hall of Fame, it's a list of people, of God's people throughout the year who trusted him and walked by faith. So here's his description of, the writer's description of Moses. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Pharaoh, in which the people were in that land, had given an edict that all the newborn Hebrew boys were to be killed. But his parents saved him by putting him in a basket in the river. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. As someone who has grown up in the church and heard stories from a very young age about this guy named Moses, what a mighty man he was. If you think about all that he did, if you've read in the Old Testament the things that he did, he's a mighty man. Many of us have heard the stories how Moses walked by faith with God. We read the scriptures and we look up to people like this. We think, wow, look at all the ways that they trusted God. What would we call Moses? A hero? One of the heroes of the faith? I've heard that phrase before. Well, that's a very apt description, except for one thing. Calling him a hero makes him someone who's not like me. And I don't know if you can relate to that. Man, Moses saw God move in these crazy ways. Too bad I don't get to see that. Too bad that's not in my experience. Today, I'd like to use Moses' life as a case study on the life of walking by faith. So open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 3. We're going to be spending time in Exodus chapter 3 and 4. There's Bibles under the seats in front of you. I didn't look up a page number, but someone can shout out a page number when you get there, if you're using one of the Bibles in front of you. We're going to be looking at Moses' life as a case study. Would you like to see God work in your life in mighty ways? Would you like to see him use you in the lives of others in ways that you can't imagine? This morning I'd like to share 3 elements that are present when God is when God is at work in and through a normal life like yours and mine. 3 elements present when God is at work. So we're going to jump into Exodus here in just a minute. I'm going to pray for us. Father, as we open up your word today, would you guide us? Lord, I have some things to share, but I pray that you would be the one sharing by your Holy Spirit, teaching us, convicting us, encouraging us in the ways that we need. Lord, you know what our hearts need and what our minds need, so would you give us that today, Lord? We love you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, 3 elements present when God is at work in a normal life like yours and mine. Okay, and we're going to see that in Moses' life here. This may be a familiar account to you of Moses and the burning bush. The first element is a God-sized calling. A God-sized, a God-planned, a God-given calling. That's the first element present when God is at work in a life. So let's jump in here. We're going to read about Moses. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. I'm reading from the ESV. It might be slightly different from the translation that you have, but be able to follow along together. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He had led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why this bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then Moses said, God said, Do not come near, and take the sandals off your feet, for the place in which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So we'll stop there for a second. What's happening here? Where is this calling coming from that Moses is getting? Well, it's coming from none other, well, first of all, from a burning bush. I don't know how many of you have been talked to from a burning bush, and that's happened to you in the last couple of weeks. It hasn't happened to me. There's this bush, and it's burning, but it's not being consumed. It's not burning up. And the God of the universe, the living God, is speaking to him from that bush. He's hearing a voice. As best we can tell, it's an audible voice. This is a big deal. He's getting a calling from God himself. And his response? He hid his face for he was afraid to look at God. That's a very understandable response, and one that you or I would also have as well. He has a God-sized calling, a calling right from God himself. Let's keep reading in verses 7 through 10. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and bring them up out of that land into a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come up to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So he's starting to hash out this God-sized calling that God is giving him. So God says that he is going to rescue his people, the nation of Israel, and he's going to bring them to a good land that he had promised them. All right, God, sounds great. But here's the task for Moses. You are going to be the one who's going to do it. You are going to go to Pharaoh, and you are going to bring my people out of Egypt. So Moses is receiving this task, a monumental task. Let's jump down to verse 16. We're in 16 through 19. God is again hashing out, here's how I want you to go about doing this. He says, starting in verse 16, Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they, the elders, will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless he is compelled by a mighty hand. So here's Moses' task. Go talk to the elders of Israel, the people, even though the people of Israel are in slavery at this time, they still have some leaders who are there. Go talk to them, tell them that God spoke to you, and give them my promise that I'm going to lead them out of this land. Now, if I was Moses, this would beg the question, God, why don't you tell them? Right? Why are you speaking to me? He's not even in Egypt right now. He's over in the land of Midian. And not only does he go to the elders of Israel and tell them this plan, then God says he's going to go talk to Pharaoh, who is the ruler, one of the most powerful men in the whole world right now at this time, and talk to him about this and tell him this plan. And by the way, he's going to need some convincing. He's not going to like this. Put yourself in Moses' shoes. What a task to be given from a voice in a burning bush. I'd be asking yourself if you were crazy or something. This is a God-sized, this is a God-planned, this is a God-given calling, a God-given task. And this is the first element that we find as God invites Moses to partner with him in his work, a God-sized calling. Now, back in the fall of 2008, my wife and I, Katie, we had been married for just about a year. We were working with the navigators up there in Eau Claire, at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire up there. And we were getting ready for her to graduate, and we knew it was time, if we were going to continue in this ministry, to be moving to a new place for additional training. And it was decided that that place would be the University of Illinois down in Urbana-Champaign. Some of you may be familiar with that campus. We've been married just over a year. We're living in an apartment in Eau Claire. Now, moving to central Illinois wasn't exactly on our bucket list, living down there. But there were some great mentors that we knew we could be trained by down there, and that was very attractive to us. But this was a big deal. We're moving farther away from my family. We're going to be about 4.5 hours from Katie's parents, about 8 from mine up north. So this was a big deal. This is a big step in our young married life. But Jesus gave a fantastic promise in Mark 10:29. He says, right after the rich young ruler comes and Jesus tells him to sell everything and follow him, and the man walks away sad, kind of turns down the offer. But Peter and some of the other disciples who had given up everything to follow Jesus said, well, what about us? We've given up everything to follow you. And Jesus makes this promise in Mark 10:29. He says, I tell you the truth, whoever has left house or land or brother or sister or mother or father or children for the sake of the gospel will not fail to receive in this lifetime 100-fold houses and land and wife and children and friends and all these things with persecutions and in the age to come eternal life. So there's this promise that if the things that we leave for the sake of the gospel to follow in obedience to Jesus, he's going to provide for us in the meantime. It's a crazy promise. And as we move towards this move to Illinois, I found the Lord drawing my heart to trust him and pray very specifically for something big as we moved into Champaign. And that was for us that we'd be able to rent a house. Certainly we can find an apartment. There's 40,000 college students down there. We can find something like that. But wanted to be able to rent a house. Between living in a new place far away from family and friends and ministering to college students, our house is a very important asset for our kingdom work. So we started praying in July thinking about what we need and what we desire in a house. The Lord was nudging us towards specific prayer, but specific prayer can be a terrifying prospect, right? Because what if I pray specifically, and what if he doesn't answer? Or he answers no, and I get my hopes up, right? We don't like to have our hopes dashed. What if that happens? What would your response be if you were in Moses' situation in this case? It's not surprising that Moses responded the way he did. A God-sized calling, he responded to that with the second element that is often present when God partners with people, and that is human insufficiency. Human insufficiency, the insufficiencies that we face. We're not up for the task. We're weak. Maybe it's sin. Maybe it's just weakness in our lives. Look at verse 11 in Exodus 3. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Egypt out of Israel? Who am I, he's asking. This task is not small. And if you read in chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus, if you've read that before, you'll remember that Moses was an Israelite, but he grew up in Pharaoh's palace. He was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And many years earlier at one point, he had sought to defend his Israelite brothers, who were these people in slavery, by killing one of the Egyptian taskmasters who was being harsh. And he thought no one knew about this. And the next day he's walking and he sees two of his Israelite brothers, two of the slaves, fighting each other, and he tries to intervene. And one of the guys points out and says, oh, what, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? So he's found out. So what does he do? He flees. He tried to deliver his people. He tried to, take advantage of the situation. God's put me in a position of power, and I'm going to deliver, judge something to the people myself. And it failed miserably. He was rejected in that case by his own people even. And then certainly by Pharaoh, who was now to kill him because he had killed one of the Egyptians. And now years later, decades later, he finds God asking him to go back to that same land, to those same groups of people on his behalf. Human insufficiency. Moses' response to God's request is chock full of doubt and weakness. As you read throughout Exodus 4, you'll hear Moses say things like, who am I to do such a task? How are they going to know I'm really speaking on behalf of God? The people won't believe me. I can't speak, I'm not skilled enough, etc., etc. He's very aware of his insufficiency. And that's something that you and I, if we're honest with ourselves, we can relate. Think about the things that God has called you to. If you're a follower of Jesus, just a life of holiness, following his example, living a life in obedience to the scriptures, that's not an easy thing. Think of the great commandments. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. How's that going today for you? It's going okay. It's not going great for me, even today, this morning already. I've only been awake for a few hours. Think about the Great Commission. The call that Jesus made to go make disciples of all nations, to bring this good news of Jesus and his sacrifice on the cross and his resurrection to all the nations of the earth. What a task. Am I up for that task? I feel insufficient for that task. Human insufficiency. This is the second element present when God is at work in a life. Now back to our move, as we were thinking about back in 2008. Through the second half of that year, we started to list out the things that we need and a few things that we desire, too, as we were praying for a house as God sent us to the University of Illinois for ministry. In addition to bedrooms for guests and kids that we hope to have soon, I need a home office space. Proximity to campus is a huge plus because there's a lot of back and forth even during the day that would happen. We need space to host 20 to 60 college students at our house at different times for events. Some of you guys who have been involved with us know about that. We were support-raising missionaries, married just a year. Katie would be graduating from college, and we'd have student loans to pay back. And the reality was we couldn't afford to rent something like we were praying for. The prayer list didn't match up with a house like that. Wasn't something that was within our budget. The human realities were clear. We were praying for something we could not deliver under our own power. And when you're doing something like this, it's easy to ask yourself if you're kind of crazy. Why am I doing this? Am I just making this up? Is this selfish? What is this? But God kept that prayer on our hearts. Well, back to Moses and his objections. It's important to note, again, that Moses is probably right about a lot of his objections. These aren't crazy objections that he has. Was he really up for the task of being the one man who was going to deliver a whole nation from captivity from a powerful Pharaoh? Really? One man going to do that? Given the nature of the task that God had given him and what Moses knows about himself, surely this is impossible, right? Surely this is impossible. And it would be. It would be, apart from the third element that we see present here when God is at work. And that third element is God's all-sufficient presence. And this is where we're going to camp out for a little bit more today. God's all-sufficient presence. This is the thing that's most important. God has an answer for all of Moses' objections. Let's read on in chapter 3 and 4 to see how Moses' insufficiency was answered by God's sufficiency, his presence. So first, I will try and follow along here. His objection, his insufficiency. In verse 11, as I read before, Moses says to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring your people out of Egypt?" The natural question arises for him, who am I to do such a task? You know me, God. Who am I to do this? Well, his provision is his presence. Look in verse 12, God's response to him. "But I will be with you," he says. That's the first thing. "And this will be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on his mountain." God says, I'm going to go with you. His presence. Now, I would guess if this interaction took place later in Moses' life, after he had grown to know God, the first half of verse 12 would have been enough, and the rest of chapter 3 and 4 wouldn't have had to exist, as we'll read. That would have been enough. Moses learned later in his life that out of God's presence flows his provision. When God is present, his provision will follow. "I will be with you," he said. But Moses, at this point, didn't know the Lord very well yet. And he wanted more than that. God's presence wasn't enough for him. Well, God is gracious with him, and this dialogue between him continues, and that's what the rest of chapter 3 and 4 has for us. Okay? Another provision that God brings is a sign. Let's see. Yep, he provides a sign. What I read in verse 12. He says, "This will be a sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." Now this is a great sign. God is like foretelling the future. So you're going to go lead the people out, and someday you're going to come back to this mountain with this nation of people, and you're going to think, oh yeah, God told me that this was going to happen. Wouldn't you like to be a part of something like that? Now, at the same time, this is not such a comforting thing because it's going to happen in the future after all of this happens that he's afraid of. But it is a piece of God's provision. Another insufficiency, verse 13. Moses said to God, "If I come to the people and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" What Moses is saying here is, I'm speaking on behalf of God. That's kind of a big deal. How are they going to know that I'm really doing so? Who are you to send me? That's what he's asking here. And God provides multiple provisions in line with this. Look at verse 14 and 15. He provides him with a name. God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say to this people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Say to the people of Israel, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations.'" He gives him a name, and the name is I Am, and we could spend a whole other time talking about this. But isn't it awesome, just as a side note, that our God, the God of the Scriptures, the Lord, calls himself the great I Am? You hear about gods and goddesses all around. It's the God of the sea, and the God of the dead, and the God of the underworld, and God of the heavens, where our God is just I Am. He just is. That's his name. He's not. It shows his dominion and his authority isn't just over this one little area. But he just is, and the rest of reality is defined around him. I think that's just amazing. He gives him a name. He also gives him a promise. Look at verse 17. He says, "I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to this land, the land that flows with milk and honey." He promises. It's like, I'm giving you my word. This is God. He doesn't really need to promise. What he says happens. But he's giving him a promise to hang on to. And hey, remember how Pharaoh wouldn't go so easily? God's already told him that. Well, look at verse 20. Pharaoh's not going to let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So, God says, "I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. And after that, he will let you go." So, I'm going to do some crazy things, Moses, that is going to compel this stubborn Pharaoh to let you go. More provision from God. Another insufficiency. They won't believe me. The people aren't going to believe me. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" Now recall that one of Moses' challenges was going back to Egypt, the place that he had fled from. Remember how he was rejected as a deliverer of his people by the Israelites before, and he was also rejected by Pharaoh. He was a wanted man. He estranged himself from them. The people aren't going to believe me. Who am I to do this? This is a big insufficiency that he's facing. Well, what is God's provision in this case? God's provision is favor with people. That's exactly what he needs, right? He says, "I'm in an unfavorable position to do this." God says, "I will give you favor. I will give you favor." Look at verse 18 of chapter 3. So I'm jumping back and forth a little bit, and we'll continue to here. 3:18. He says, "And they," this is the elders of Israel, "will listen to your voice, and you and the elders shall go to the king of Egypt." So he's saying, I'm going to give you favor with your people, with the Hebrews, with the Israelites. I'll give you favor with them. And if that wasn't enough, look ahead to chapter 3, verse 21. He also says, "I will give this people favor," give the Israelites favor, "in the sight of the Egyptians, and when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. He shall put them on their sons and daughters, and so shall you plunder the Egyptians." This doesn't happen ever, anywhere, right? The term plunder is if, we're a powerful nation, we come take over and we take all the people's stuff. That's how you plunder them. And he's saying, no, they're going to give it to you. I'm going to give them so much favor. You're going to have favor with them so much that they're just going to give their stuff to you. Stuff like gold and silver and clothing. That's amazing. It's an amazing form of provision. It's amazing. Another insufficiency. Moses isn't done yet with God. I can't speak. Look at chapter 4, verse 10. "But Moses said to the Lord, 'O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue.'" I can't speak. I'm not skilled enough. I'm not good enough. Well, God had already promised wonders to be done by Moses, right? We talked about that a little bit. And you can read about this in chapter 4, verses 2 through 9. He says, what's in that in your hand? The Lord says to Moses, and Moses says, a staff. He says, throw it on the ground. Moses throws it on the ground. He threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran away from it. God tells him to throw this staff on the ground, and it turns into this probably fierce-looking snake. And if that was me, I would probably be running from it as well, right? What's going on here? And he tells him to take hold of it by the tail, picks it up, and turns back into a staff. He tells him to put his hand in his cloak, pulls it out, and it's all leprous, all skin disease all over the place. It says, put it back in, he puts it back in, and then it's healed. And he says, and maybe they'll listen to those two signs. And even if they don't, to those, then you can go take some water from the Nile River, pour it out on the ground, it's going to turn to blood. Have you guys seen that happen before? This is crazy stuff, right? But that's, God says, I'm going to empower your speech with these signs that will show authority. He promises to be present in Moses' gifts. Look at chapter 4, verse 11. The Lord's direct response to this, I can't speak. He says, who made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? It's like, Moses, I made your mouth. I know how you can and can't speak. And I can make your mouth move in the way that I want to. He even promises that he will be Moses' personal tutor in this regard. Look at verse 12 of chapter 4. Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and will teach you what to speak. How would you like to have God as a tutor? A speech professor. Not just a speech professor, but he's like feeding you lines, like telling you what to do, right? Telling you what to say. Giving you boldness and courage to move forward. That's what God promises here. God promises to go with him, and God's presence ushers in his provision in all these different ways. So is Moses ready to say, okay, God, sounds good? Not quite yet. Not quite yet. His final injection, sorry, I missed a couple slides there. He's out of excuses. And I love this. He doesn't have any excuses left. He doesn't have any worries left. He doesn't have any justifications. Chapter 4, verse 13. But he said, oh my Lord, please send someone else. You ever get to that point? You made all your excuses, trying to justify things. And your heart is laid bare. I have nothing else. I just don't want to go, Lord. I just don't want to do it. Send someone else. Well, God gives him 2 more pieces of provision, and these are ones that you and I need as well. The first one is patience. Verse 13, he says, please send someone else. Verse 14, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he destroyed him with a lightning bolt. No, that's not what it says, right? He consumed him with the fire. No, he says, is there not Aaron your brother Levi? I know he can speak well. Behold, I'm going to send him with you, is what he sends. So he is patient. Look at all that God has given him, and Moses still isn't biting. Wouldn't it make sense for God just to burn Moses up and move on to someone else? But God is patient with him. And he gives him a partner. He says, your brother Aaron, he's going to come with you. He's a good speaker. You guys are going to do this together. What patience God has with Moses and what patience he has with us. Where Moses is insufficient, God is more than sufficient. Where Moses has weakness, God has strength. Where Moses has questions, God has answers. Are you getting the picture that carrying out this mission actually depends a lot more on God than it does on Moses? This third part is the key, this third element, God's sufficiency, his presence, his provision. Well, it's late 2008, and we're needing to get our Champaign housing figuring out. We're ministering on campus at Eau Claire, but we're getting ready to move in the spring. Our move is just months away. I'm scouring Craigslist and every other channel for an answer to our prayer. We're praying for something that, in our view, doesn't exist yet. We haven't seen yet. We put a wanted ad on Craigslist, and we hear from a woman named Karen. She's a local businesswoman. She owns just a couple houses in town. And she just bought one on an auction, kind of on a whim, and is fixing it up. And she said, oh, maybe this might work for you. Well, what does it have? 3 bedrooms, plus an office space, like a separate office space. It has a large backyard. It's in a quiet neighborhood, but it's also on the same street several blocks down from the Student Union, which is a place where we do a lot of our meetings. It's a bike ride away from campus, and it's on 2 bus lines, which is important down in that city. It has a huge backyard with room for a fire pit. It has extra space in the basement for storage and a larger area for students to gather. And also included, I don't think we were praying for this, were appliances, a dining room table, and living room furniture, which were things that we didn't have living in our apartment. So we visit in January to kind of scout out some housing and to visit the campus. And it's pretty much what we're praying for. I have a picture right there. Doesn't have the shutters on it right there, but 705 West Green Street, Champaign, Illinois, 61820. There it is right there. It's pretty much what we need. And this woman is redoing the inside and cleaning it up and making it really nice. So we get down there and we see this, and we're like, wow, this would be amazing. This would be perfect for what for us and what we're doing. This is an answer to prayer, but there's a problem. She told us that she could get at least $1,200 a month if she rented this out to college students down there. And we had been praying for a maximum of $700 a month in rent. That's a big difference, right? So we're trying to, how do we do the price thing, but she's not like closing the door either, and she kind of kept putting off this price conversation, which left us in a panic. We finally met to discuss it. We sit down. She was not a believer in Jesus, but she learned that about our ministry. She knew someone else who was on staff with another similar organization, and she was excited to see the house used to help people and to bless people. She asked us then to name a price. I thought to myself, okay, we're praying for $700, but that'll never work. So, what's the most? $750. How about $750 a month? It's probably not going to work, but that's what I don't know. We'll find that extra $50 somewhere. She says, okay. And she also tells us that we can pay a flat fee for our utilities. She's going to keep them under her name so we don't have to mess with all that stuff. We'll just pay her a flat fee for that stuff. We had a house. God answered our prayers. But in the back of my mind, I still had this thing. What were we praying for? How much? $700. What did I ask for? $750. I was like, we'll find the $50 somewhere. We can make that work, right? This isn't, it wasn't God's fault, right? But I wavered a little bit. Well, guess what? A year later, she ended up lowering our rent to $700 and giving us a free month rent because we were using less utilities than expected. The Lord was patient to answer our prayer, even when we didn't have the faith to name that price at the beginning. He was so gracious with us in a way that would have been fine with $750. Yeah, we could have been fine. But it just hit me when she said that. I get this email from her. Landlords, especially students, you've dealt with landlords, right? And when you've gotten an email like that, hey, we're going to lower your rent and give you a free month rent. Does that happen? That doesn't happen. It's amazing. And we built a relationship with this landlord. We even got to share the gospel with her some years into a relationship with her. So we had a house, and it's one that hosted many guests and scores of students. Here's the senior class and the navigators. The year that we left Illinois to come up here. This is on our deck at our house. We had a kind of a senior party with them. So these are young lives who God used us and the other staff on campus to change through His Word, through the Holy Spirit, for the sake of the gospel. A God-sized task, human insufficiency, and God's all-sufficient presence and provision. These three elements combine to give us an opportunity and a challenge to obey in faith. And when God invites us to step out in faith, He's not just inviting us into an opportunity to impact others. He's inviting us into the tremendous personal blessing of knowing our God more deeply. And that's what we experienced in this. So what happens with Moses? Well, you can read about it. Look at chapter 4, verse 20. So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey, and they went back to the land of Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. Moses finally relented. He says, okay, God, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. He's going to choose to take God at His word. He places his faith in God's promises. I'm sure he was still terrified, but he chose to believe that God would come through. And if you read through the book of Exodus, do you see what God did? Moses literally led a huge nation for decades. He led them out of slavery from a powerful nation through the wilderness into the edge of the promised land. What an impact. What an impact. And not only that, remember how God's presence wasn't enough for Moses back in the beginning of Exodus 3 at the beginning of this interaction? God says, I'm going to go with you, but Moses needs all this extra stuff. Well, much later in Exodus 33, Moses is leading the people in the wilderness, decades later. The people are rebelling big time against God again, and God says in his anger, he says, I'm no longer going to go with this people. I'm going to send an angel. The angel will lead you, but I'm not going to go with you anymore. Moses responds by saying to the Lord, Lord, if your presence will not go with us, do not send us out of here. Later in life, the only thing that Moses needs is God's presence. He has gotten to know his God deeply, and his presence, God's presence, was Moses' greatest treasure. Moses was a changed man in walking by faith. Well, what about you and me? Are your eyes open to God's work around you? Are you even noticing? What is God inviting you into, big or small? What steps of faith is he asking you to walk by? Today, this week? Are you finding yourself woefully insufficient for the tasks that God is calling you to? If so, good. You probably are woefully insufficient if God is the author of those tasks. And too often we settle for tasks that we can handle, don't we? Don't we do that? Is he asking you to set aside habitual sin or certain priorities that you're clinging to that are not from him? Or is he inviting you to trust him with a new opportunity that's intriguing but uncomfortable? Is he inviting you to wade into his Great Commission work, taking bold steps of relationship with those outside these church walls? Are you asking for his provision? Are you trusting him and watching for it? Is his presence enough for you? Will you choose to respond in faith in the coming weeks? A God-sized task, human insufficiency, and God's all-sufficient presence. This is a recipe for experiencing the power and workings of our mighty